This whole thing of Asperger's or on the spectrum is a fairly new thing. Used to be autism had a fairly narrow definition that was, clearly identifiable. But this idea that if you're slow socializing, I have a behavior where I rock that bothers people, but that's also common, so-called self-stimming type things. So I realized, wow, there's a bit of a pattern match there.
In his upcoming book, Source Code, Bill Gates reveals new details about his childhood, including the realization that were he a kid today, he would be diagnosed on the autism spectrum.
Looking back on that, because I didn't behave in a...
It is curious to be self-diagnosing one of these things, but probably checks out. I think most software engineers or tech-heavy individuals, I think, have an outside proportion of individuals who could be considered on the spectrum. So it's not outlandish, but that does seem to be a stretch to be self-diagnosing, especially considering Bill Gates probably has more than enough doctors and financial resources to get adequate and professional assessments of these things. But I'm not sure where they're going to take this.
A standard way. And yet, that deep concentration that got applied to math and science and eventually to all those programming experiences I had, that became a strength.
A strength that changed the world and made Gates among the richest and most influential leaders of our time. I caught up with him in California to speak with him about his early years and on the issues of the day, as Trump takes office with tech leaders lining up to support him.
Did your parents, did they ever worry about you? I mean, you used to slip out of the bedroom window and go and code in the middle of the night. Do you think they worried about you, or do you think they were just like, nah?
They worried about would I fit in. The two things they did, one, sent me to a therapist who got me thinking about how I applied my energy, and then sending me to a really great school.
Yeah.
Those were great for me.
It was at school that Gates first met Paul Allen, his Microsoft co-founder. The two were among the first tech titans.
It seems to me there's been a culture shift, though, in Silicon Valley. Perhaps characterize it as it used to be sort of tech nerds, and now it's very much tech bros. Do you sort of feel like you're still part of it?
Well, I think they're still nerds, as far as I can tell. They don't deserve some new term. Jesus, they're just as nerdy as they ever were. I mean, come on. Yes, the vision that, Paul Allen and I had at age 18, that the digital revolution would change the world more than any other thing, that's really been borne out. The most valuable companies in the world are the children of that insight, and they've, provided super innovative products. And so, of course, the tech people are richer and understanding, okay, what's their next thing, primarily AI. In this case, has become more important. Early in the days of Microsoft, I didn't believe in having an office in Washington, D.C. I later learned that was a mistake, but I had kind of a purist view that I didn't need to engage in talking to the government.
Have you met Donald Trump since the election?
Yeah, I had a chance to go have a long and actually quite intriguing dinner with him.
What did you discuss? What was intriguing?
Well, we touched on a lot of things. It was over 3 hours. To my surprise, it was, just he and I, his chief of staff, Susie Wiles, and the person who helps manage things for me, Larry Cohen. So the four of us sat there, and it was quite wide-ranging. Global health's the area that I work in, and such amazing things have happened and can happen there. I spoke a lot about HIV and that the foundation's literally working on a cure for that. We're at an early stage, and so he, in the COVID days, accelerated the vaccine innovation. So I was asking him if maybe the same kind of thing could be done here, and we both got, I think, pretty excited about that. We talked about polio, where we're very close to getting that done, but if you stop, it'll spread back. And so I explained why it's been tough in Pakistan, Afghanistan. We've had cases show up in Gaza, we have cases in Africa, and he was fascinated to hear what he could do to maximize the chance that during the next 4 years that incredible milestone will be achieved. I felt like
So something that's interesting as I'm hearing him kind of recollect his conversation with Trump, which is there has been some discussion and commentary about oligarchies, things like that in America at the moment due to obviously Trump himself being very rich, him having very close ties with other very rich people like Elon Musk, Bill Gates, obviously, and a number of other individuals. And so one of the things that's interesting here is on one side, this basically kind of reinforces that narrative where the leader of, or a key leader of America is interacting with other billionaires and then seeking their opinion on how to shape America, which means that they have an outsized vote, so to speak, or an outsized power over how America is going to be shaped and molded in the next few years. On the flip side, many of these individuals became successful on their own. And so that is an interesting counterpoint to that initial example. It's not like he's talking to like the inheritors of like the Walmart fortune or some other grand name like Rockefellers, etc. And they're like just choosing to talk to purely rich individuals who weren't necessarily the key individuals to build that wealth. These individuals who are the richest people now, especially in America, are usually the ones who, while I wouldn't necessarily say self-starters, they did grow a very sizable portion of their wealth in their own lifetime. I think people can agree to that. Bill Gates obviously being one of them. He certainly came from a reasonable family background. I don't think his parents were billionaires for sure. I'm not sure if they were even millionaires from my knowledge, but he was in a very good, maybe upper middle class family. He didn't really have any needs that were unmet. He had access to a variety of tools and education that allowed him to succeed. But that isn't because he was in like the top 1% when he was born. But obviously he's made it to that and beyond in his adulthood. And so just kind of musing through that, it's curious to me that there is this dichotomy that exists where you can focus in on the people who are the richest, but also most of the people who are the richest today got there for a reason. And so how do you kind of counterbalance those two sides of these individuals? On one side, they are people who likely have done harm directly or indirectly due to their accumulation of wealth in one mechanism or another. But then they're also very smart and driven individuals who see opportunities and the world around them in a different way than maybe the average person does, to the point where they were able to make an outsized impact into the world as we know it. Curious if you all have any thoughts on this. Please post it in the comments if you do. I'd be curious to hear what you think on this topic.
like he was, energized and, looking forward to helping to drive innovation. I was frankly impressed with how well he showed a lot of interest in the issues I brought up.
What do you make of RFK and vaccines and what he's saying about it and the position he's been given in this incoming administration?
Well, he wrote a book.
Oh, getting a little spicier here with the questions. We'll see what Bill has to say about this.
Saying that Tony Fauci and I kill millions of children and make billions of dollars with vaccines. And, people can judge for themselves
Those are some strong words.
whether that's correct or not.
Ahead of Trump's election, the Wall Street Journal reported Gates donated around $50 million towards a pro-Harris super PAC.
But you didn't actually ever publicly endorse her. Why was that?
In my role as chairman of the Gates Foundation, we've had incredible relationships with every administration. The progress since the year 2000, cutting childhood death in half, cutting HIV deaths in half, that's due to partnerships with rich world governments where the U.S. is an absolute the most generous. And so, I look forward to working together with every administration.
So basically what he's saying here is he has so much flexibility right now in what he does that he doesn't want to sour relations with basically one party over another. He will fund one party where he has his preference, but he isn't going to overly prefer one party or individual over another just because the ramifications could be backlash when that president or that individual or party could take over. And so that was at least my takeaway, is that he's sort of hedging his bets of he'll push things to where he wants it to be, but he also doesn't want to lose his authority overall, and that's too much of a risk to put himself completely out there to advocate for one party or one individual.
So there's obviously another big tech titan close to this administration, Elon Musk. Yes! When was the last time you spoke to Elon?
I haven't spoken directly to him. It may have been about 18 months. But, I've known Elon over the years. He's a member of the Gideon Pledge, and I admire a lot of the great work he's done.
What do you think of the way he's using his platform to influence the political landscape?
Well, I think the idea that looking at government expenditures on a sort of zero-based budgeting approach could be a valuable thing. I'm amongst the people who think the deficit needs to be brought down because otherwise.
So this is a good point that he's bringing up right now. So what he's basically referencing is Elon Musk is, while she asked him a question about basically his involvement in the political landscape, he is sort of referencing how Elon is going to be leading in basically the segment to look at government spending overall. And what he was referencing there of like a zero-based budget or something like that is basically what he's saying is somebody who's looking very strictly at the budget of each of these departments and aiming for them to be as small as feasibly possible. And so this is something that's done in business all the time. And so him being a CEO for a variety of companies, he would be very familiar with this, which is in the private sector and in the general market, if you're a CEO or you're a business leader, you're looking to cut expenses, and especially expenses that don't necessarily return as much as you would like, very aggressively in many cases, because there is the saying of a dollar saved is a dollar earned, and that's because at the end of the day, you're only going to have so many dollars, and so if you have a certain amount of income and you're spending 100% of it, then you have no dollars left over. But if you can save some of it, then you have those extra dollars in your pocket at that point. And that works for businesses, and it works at larger scales as well. And so this is where, especially, there seems to be a belief of the government kind of getting overinflated, maybe less efficient over time, just because they've had a plethora of money and they aren't necessarily as aggressive in cutting employees or budgets, etc. And so in a scenario like that, either the employees or maybe the people they work with can start to take advantage or kind of blow out those processes and that budget over time. And so that might not necessarily be nefarious in those ways. So like for the employees, as an example, maybe this could be in a variety of scenarios. So one could be maybe you know that there's basically no layoffs at your company, this being the government in this case, which would basically have no reason to lay anyone off because they can pretty much make their own money anyway if they needed to. And so maybe you don't work as hard as you would in another company that does do layoffs fairly regularly. Also, maybe when you're looking at budgets, maybe you could say to yourself, well, we could actually probably save 5 or 10% here on this thing, but we always have more than enough money. I can just ask for 10% more budget next year and it'll get approved. Why put in the effort to negotiate with our vendors or our contractors or whatever it is when you can just avoid that hassle and still have the same outcome? And so these are things that can kind of slip over time. And so this is where I do somewhat agree with Bill in this case, and potentially Elon Musk, in that it might be useful to have someone take this lens to the government. Because if they're not taking this lens to the government at all, then this bloat is naturally going to keep growing over time. And so having a proper cleaning, like a cleaning of house, doing a spring cleaning of some sort, going through everything, just double checking everything is there, is probably going to be beneficial. Obviously, there's the counter argument here of Elon Musk is going to likely be biased himself. And so he could take things too extreme, or he could start cutting things that negatively impact him, like regulators who have in the past made his life difficult when he was doing things that maybe weren't up to code. And so he could maybe just defund that department so that in the future he can just get away with doing more things kind of not up to code or up to regulations, and then save himself a lot of time and money in the future in his businesses. And so that adds a gray area, but I think at face value, somebody double checking how our spending is in a variety of areas that maybe haven't had too much due diligence in the past could be beneficial, and make sure that things are running generally efficiently, but we'll have to see how that actually turns out.
I said it will create a financial problem for us. And so, that effort could come up with some good things. I'm not, trying to talk about European politicians like he is. So some of that surprises me a bit. But wow, he finds time to do a lot of things.
If you were Elon Musk and you were put in charge of the Doge project, where would you be looking to make savings?
Well, given the numbers that they've tossed around, they'll have to look at everything.
It is ridiculous that he did call it Doge. That's just such a silly thing that now people have to say because he just wanted to make this backronym for referencing like Dogecoin. It's just such a silly thing for somebody to do. Sometimes I hear things about Elon Musk and he doesn't seem as mature as I would hope he is in certain scenarios, and definitely naming this department Doge 100% falls in that bucket of he's supposed to be this individual who's really smart and somebody that I would expect people would want to look up to and admire. But then on the other side, he's doing a lot of these silly things. And I think, in my opinion, that sort of hurts his credibility to some extent. Obviously, not to enough of an extent that he just got a huge role in the government and is obviously a big business leader. But still, I think that's something that does happen. I think like Bill Gates as a counter example here, I think he takes himself fairly seriously and he takes various topics fairly seriously. And personally, I perceive Bill Gates as somebody who is a very responsible individual, certainly much more so than Elon Musk. And so even for this particular task, if Bill Gates had to go through and comb through some budgets, I would probably be just as happy, if not happier. But that's obviously not the scenario that we're in.
Including pension, defense, healthcare. My view is most departments, there probably are, 10 to 15%. I do worry a little bit that if you say, hey, let's completely get rid of things, some of the things that have long-term benefits, I obviously believe in HIV medicines where the US is keeping tens of millions of people alive. And if you cut those off, not only would they die when we have a cure on its way, but the negative feelings you'd have, say, in Africa.
So this is a great point, which is this exact scenario happens in businesses all the time, which is when you start combing through your expenses, R&D, generally speaking, is one of those things that you would very much want to cut because you spend a lot of money on it. You probably don't make that much from it, and certainly not directly, because usually by the time R&D develops something that is profitable, you'd probably pull it out of R&D and then put it into like its own product line, and then you'd account for that separately. And so this is one of those things where time and time again, these things get pulled out. And I would say engineering activities as well, or just general research or scientific pursuits, fall into this category. I think to use a separate example, you could maybe think of infrastructure as something like this, where you can't just build a huge new segment of infrastructure. Like, you couldn't just make a bunch of new railways across America overnight. That's going to take years and years and years to do. And so you could look at that and say, well, we're investing all this money. We're 2 years down the road out of a 5, 10, 20-year project, and it's made us $0. And of course, that's going to be the scenario. And so you can look ahead and say, well, we're going to spend 8, maybe more years on this project, and it's still not going to make us any money until after that. So why would I put in all this money at this point? And so it can force certain businesses and individuals to really hyper focus on the short term and then kind of avoid doing all the hard problems, so to speak, which is, I think, what he's referencing here, which is like HIV, which is, well, if we just look at things that are going to be profitable in the near term and things that are going to definitely benefit us in the next 1 to 2 years, solving and curing HIV is probably not going to make that list. That's going to be something that you likely have to invest in for decades to actually finally solve. And so how do you weigh those two things? And when you come at these scenarios with a very hyper focus to budgeting and budget sensitivity, these things are the first ones to get cut once you get deeper into those investigations. Obviously, you get rid of all the wasteful stuff first, but then there's a gray area. Is this funding wasteful? How much progress are they making? What would be considered a good amount of progress versus a bad amount of progress? And there's no clear definition here, especially in these pursuits. Maybe you could spend a couple of years not really making any progress, and then boom, you found the right thing, and then now everything's starting to speed up. But you won't know that until you hit that point in time.
Would be worse than never having done the thing at all. So the parts of the budget I know well, yes, you could optimize, but I hope the value system still includes the 0.5% that saves all those lives.
The Journal previously reported on Gates's ties to Jeffrey Epstein, including that Epstein threatened Gates over an affair he had. The two met a few times, Gates says, to discuss philanthropy.
Do you think, looking back at that moment, that you were being played?
Well, Jeffrey, in retrospect, I was foolish to spend any time with him, and he sort of, got time with various people by spending time with other people. So yes, I think I was quite stupid. I thought it would help me with global health philanthropy. In fact, it failed to do that, and it was just a huge mistake.
Has it made you more wary of connections?
Definitely.
Yeah.
Are you kidding?
Now, you're not elected, but I think it's fair to say that you could probably pick up the phone to any world leader out there. Who's the last world leader that you spoke to?
Because of how engaged the foundation is in these global health issues, I talk to world leaders a lot.
Mm-hmm.
So in the last month, I've talked to President Macron, Ursula von der Leyen.
Do any of them ring you up and ask you for advice on how to handle Donald Trump? No,
I've never had that. I've had people be quizzical about maybe what they should do, but they're on their own on that one.
As far as China's concerned, what do you think about the direction that US-China relations are going in?
Well, I think it'd be great if we had more win-win elements in the relationship. That seems like a pretty small thing, but if you think about climate, or if you think about healthcare innovation, or certain kinds of terrorism, including not only nuclear but also bioterrorism, being prepared for epidemics, we'll see how the two big powers can get along.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned a number of scary prospects. So what keeps you awake at night?
The chance of a natural pandemic in the next 4 years is somewhere between 10 and 15%. And it'd be nice to think we're actually more ready for that than we were last time, but so far we're not.
You really think we're not?
No, we're absolutely not.
Why not?
People, rather than having a consensus about, what tools are missing, are mostly still replaying the various mistakes that were made. I wouldn't say that we're as far along as you'd expect after trillions of dollars and millions of lives have been lost.
While Gates is known for looking at what's next, the book, he says, has given him time to reflect on the past.
With this greater understanding that you earned from writing the book, has that brought some sort of wisdom, do you think?
Well, hopefully as you get older, you're more reflective and you have wisdom. I often find myself in meetings, talking about similar situations that I dealt with that either didn't succeed or did succeed. So you get into what they often talk about as a more generative mode. And writing these books certainly fits that approach. Although, I think, am I looking backwards too much? Because, there's so much exciting stuff still to be done.
Thank you for watching. If you've enjoyed what you've seen, please hit like or subscribe. I'll see you around.